In this lecture, we are going to be graphing trig equations. Our first example is y equals 3 cosine of 4x plus 1. The first thing that we need to do is label our x and y axes. So I'm going to go ahead and label this 1, 2, and 3, and then going down, -1, -2, and -3. Now, the x-axis is going to be a little bit more difficult. The first thing that you need to look at is the frequency. And our frequency is going to be 4. That means there are 4 graphs of cosine between 0 and 2 pi. Now, we are looking to graph one period. So if there are 4 graphs in 2 pi, that means there's going to be 2 graphs in a pi, and then 1 graph in half a pi. So my range on my x-axis is going to be 0 to pi over 2. So that means the fourth line, 1, 2, 3, 4, is going to be pi over 2. Well, half of pi over 2 is pi over 4. And then half of pi over 4 is going to be pi over 8. Then halfway between pi over 4 and pi over 2 is going to be 3 pi over 8. If you need more help coming up with the fractions, go ahead and ask your teacher. So now we're going to graph the ordered pairs. Now let's think about cosine. The first cosine point is at 1. So if I take 1 and multiply it by 3 to get the amplitude, 1 times 3 is 3. Then I add 1 for the vertical shift, so I'm going to go all the way up to 4. Now the second ordered pair for a cosine graph is at 0. So 0 times 3 is 0, and then 0 plus 1 is 1. The third point in a cosine graph is at -1. So -1 times 3 is -3. Then -3 plus 1 is -2. The fourth point in a cosine graph is 0. So 0 times 3 is 0. And then 0 plus 1 is 1. And finally, the last point in a cosine graph is going to be at 1. So 1 times 3 is 3, and then 3 plus 1 is 4. Now I am going to connect the dots to form my cosine graph. And that is one period of a cosine graph for that equation from 0 to pi over 2. Now let's take a look at the next equation. Y equals 2 sine of 1/4 x minus 1. The first thing I need to do is label my y-axes. So I'm going to put 1, 2, and 3, -1, -2, -3. Now I need to think through what my x-axis is going to be. So I know that there is 1/4 of a period, or 1/4 for my frequency. So 1/4 of the sine graph occurs between 0 and 2 pi. So if I double that from 1/4 to 1/2, that's going to be 4 pi. And then if I double the graph again, one period is going to happen, if I double it, between 8 pi. So I need to go from 0 to 8 pi on my graph. So I'm just going to go 0 pi, 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, and 8 pi. This way I can graph all 5 of my special ordered pairs for a sine graph. So now, sine starts at 0. So you're going to do 0 times 2, which is 0, and then 0 minus 1 is negative 1. So my first ordered pair is going to be at negative 1. Now for a sine graph, the next ordered pair is at 1. So 1 times 2 is 2. 2 minus 1 is back at 1. The third point is going to be at 0. So 0 times 2 is 0. And then 0 minus 1 is negative 1. The fourth point in a sine graph is at negative 1. So negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. And then negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. And my last point in a sine graph is back at 0. So 0 times 2 is 0. And then 0 minus 1 is negative 1. Now I am going to go ahead and draw my graph. So I start at negative 1 and then finish right back at negative 1. That is the graph of y equals 2 sine of 1/4 x minus 1.